Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening to our very intimate evening with Afra and Anne. So it's my great pleasure to introduce this evening. It's been a fantastic exhibition. Just so I can say this out front, but it's an exhibition that's been supported by Mondrian Fund, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the UK, Leeds 2023 and No Man's Gallery, who have helped make this exhibition happen. But it's in its last week. We've had an amazing response from visitors, and we actually welcomed our millionth visitor that we've had to the Tetley since we've been here the other week. So we've had over 1 million, and it's been a really excellent response from visitors to this exhibition. But we're joined this evening. Afra has obviously exhibited here as part of this show, but she's exhibited all around the world. She's also won several prizes for her work. She won the prestigious Royal Award for Modern Painting in 2018 and the Giuseppe Prize in 2022. And she's exhibited everywhere from Fundación Miro in Spain to Dakar Art Summit and throughout the Netherlands. We're also delighted to be joined this evening by Anne Barlow. Anne is the director of Tate St Ives, where she oversees the programme of exhibitions, collection displays, residencies, commissions, learning and research. Anne was the formerly director of Art in General in New York, and also held curatorial roles at the New Museum New York and Glasgow museums. It's fantastic to be joined by Anne, and Anne really knows Afra and her work, so we think of this evening as like an opportunity to listen in on a friend's conversation. But I hope you'll join me on welcoming them both back to the Tetley for Afra and welcoming Anne here for the first time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation to see the exhibition, of course, especially to reunite with Afra, whose work I knew, but I had never met in person and never seen an installation of the scale that I first saw at the Dakar Art Summit in February 2023, which is actually where we first met in person. And perhaps it's nice to start there because that was the first encounter that I had with your work when you worked on the exhibition Very Small Feelings, which was curated by the Samdani Art Foundation and the Kiran Nadir Museum in India. Yeah. And it was, let's say it was an incredible experience, a very intensive, very labor-intensive installation period. Totally. Where I got to watch your working process and how you changed and adapted things and even added new components quite far down the line, which was fascinating to see.
Yes, yeah, because we met maybe 10 days before the opening. Yeah. And I think you were already one day installing in the crazy, hectic space that Dakar Art Summit is. And then I think maybe, I showed an installation that was a little bit similar to the one that is here in the atrium. And then 3 days before the opening, I realized that the lighting in the space was just very bad. And I made a very radical decision. I woke up that morning and I was like, okay, I have to make lampshades. Like this, there needs to be something changed. And then, I think that's the most special thing about Dakar Art Summit is that these type of things are possible. There is a room for play. So I went up to Diana, asked her, what do you think about the idea of lampshades? And is there someone that can maybe make a structure of bamboo for me? And then we will weave these lampshades with found fabrics and leftover fabrics around it. And then I guess maybe 8 hours later, I received 5 structures that were kind of this size. And with a group of 11 students, we started singing and weaving and making these lampshades possible. And it kind of captured the spirit of the Dakar Art Summit for me. Yeah,
absolutely. And maybe since we're having the luxury of being actually in the space, it might be nice to look at our surroundings for a moment. This somewhat resembles the installation at Dakar Art Summit, but there are also elements right behind me that are quite different. Yeah. And you know, in looking at also some children playing in the installation today, the sheer joy that they got out of this incredible installation was wonderful to see. And, you know, so even in looking at the kind of textures and materials that are in your work, there's full of kind of vibrant color and pattern, and it kind of totally emanates this feeling of joy. And at the same time, there are also other undercurrents that we can maybe get into in a bit more depth. But even around us now, you have this really interesting kind of range of textures and materials and also forms. So some are very three-dimensional. And then also behind me and also on the wall opposite, it's almost like you've drawn with textiles, these really fine lines and a very different kind of approach to the materials and to image making, and I thought perhaps we could maybe talk about that for a little bit.
And I think also I'm all of a sudden seeing this shape here. There's like a vessel, which is kind of the miniature version of this one, and I just remembered that I drew this one thinking, like with the textile, thinking I want to make this one in big. So sometimes, like unconsciously, when I'm working with this medium, which is like very much like drawing, they are also a start for new works that appear from them. And I guess that the nice thing is that with the technique that I use, which is called tufting, it's a textile technique in which you can be quite more playful, whereas for example with weaving you're kind of stuck to a grid, so you can't go, like once you make something you're stuck with it. And with this technique specifically, you can also erase it and then refill it, and you can make last minute decisions, which is something that I really love to do because it also enhances this like playful and intuitive approach.
And there's also something about the way in which you can experience your work, whether it's that image on the wall here or behind me, or this entire installation as a kind of macro view. And then there's also kind of like a micro view where, you know, your eye is suddenly drawn to a couple of figures on, you know, on the ground, or, you know, one of the four-fingered hands, or a certain pattern that you've introduced. And for example, the way in which there are all these kinds of eyes and faces everywhere in the installation, you can look out, but you can also really zoom in, and it's a kind of process that is in a way quite constant when you experience the work and you spend time with it.
Yeah, because also I really love that the longer you look, the more you like kind of discover. So also there's a lot of details with maybe handmade patches that I've made over the past years, or other things, and also hidden messages that are interwoven with the works that are maybe not instantly clear, but all of a sudden you see them. And also kind of like this repetitive figures that come back, like making kind of a language in this, like kind of building a language as well.
Yeah, we were looking at the fingernails earlier, which in themselves are just like a fascinating detail, because even in looking at several of the hands, these different fingernails had come from different materials that you'd gathered in different locations over the last years.
Yeah, so I love fabrics, so I collect always wherever I go to fabric stores and collect fabrics, or if I see a nice patterned like old trousers that I don't use anymore, I use them again in these fingernails. So there's also this like kind of memory of like, for example, there is a fingernail that comes from this fabric that I got in Athens, or like it's all like it all has these memories. And like also majority of the clothes that the aliens here are wearing are actually my old clothes. And because I couldn't find really good, like sometimes I go to a thrift store, or sometimes I get from some friends like clothes, but I was really missing a little bit of tartan or something. And I love tartan, but then like all of a sudden I gave away all my trousers. So it's also funny to see them again, because yeah, I realized also the periods of time that I used to wear them myself.
Yes. Well, as a Scot, of course, I'm going to love your choice of tartan, so that's always a winner for me. I mean, through there, which has its sound turned down at the moment, there's essentially kind of like this stomach. So there's a kind of real interest in the body, in this kind of external appearance of the body, but also in these kind of internal organs and processes and sounds, and sometimes uncomfortable or awkward sounds that come with that. And you have this beautiful phrase where you call the stomach a kind of container of butterflies, which we call, you know, butterflies when you're nervous and suddenly your stomach might start rumbling, either because you're hungry or because you're nervous. But that entire installation is kind of based around that feeling and that premise. So I thought that was really fascinating, because it's not something artists often do.
And also because I think it's just a very nice, weird thing as well, that we as humans, when we hear each other's organs, that all of a sudden we get very shy. And I was thinking about this feeling of like, okay, maybe it has to do with that it's so intimate to listen to each other's organs. But also I was thinking, when I was making this stomach as kind of this carrier of emotions, or the container of the, like, it's called the primordial mother stomach, which is like this kind of container of all these feelings. So yeah, it was a very like fun work to make, also because it's made with paper mache, so it was quite labor intensive, and I was working together with my assistant, and we were talking a lot of feelings and anger about certain situations, and I can feel that we put all of that also in the making and in that becoming of the stomach.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting facets of the work in terms of also ideas around language. And in an installation through the door on our left, you have these 3 hanging pieces which have words written on the garments, but because of the folds of the garments, you can't read them in a kind of linear fashion so that they form a sentence. It's almost, as we've spoken about in other moments, it's almost more akin to poetry, where you might get a word as a signifier or as a prompt for you to think about a certain emotion or a certain experience. And so there are these moments where you use kind of written language, but there are also these kinds of signs and symbols. And in 1 or 2 places in the work, there are these horizontal pieces of fabric where you can see kind of pictograms and also kind of other symbols that maybe indicate a letter. So there were lots of hidden messages and meanings and things in the work that you kind of employ in various different ways. And there are even in some creatures that you may or may not have noticed inside a cupboard in other parts of the show. So there's a really interesting question around that kind of making something visible or semi-visible.
Yeah, and I think with the garments, that, like, I call them the warrior garments, and when I was making them, they consist out of fabrics where I write a lot of like messages of anger that I have about certain topics and situations or experiences. So they are very powerful, but also they are so personal that I actually don't want people to be fully able to see it all. And I guess that's why I really liked making these garments of them, because first of all, they became all of a sudden this like metaphor for like this garment that I could wear in order to feel empowered, but also to disassociate in a way from my own body, and to kind of get the strength from this like fictional persona in a way, to achieve things that otherwise maybe in my own feelings I wouldn't be able to do. But also that I could share certain things that are so heavy for me and that I'm dealing with, but that I can't share with, but that I do want to share with, in a way that is poetic and it's there, and maybe some glimpses of you tell a bit more about it, but it doesn't reveal too much. And here that's also why they are twisting, like slowly turning, like you see sometimes with the wind, you see a bit more, but sometimes like still you can't see the whole text or all the symbols inside. Yeah.
I mean, without going into all of the writers that interest you, maybe we could take a moment to talk about Audre Lorde, because that you know, she seems to be a very pivotal figure in terms of, I guess, the influence of writing, and it would be intriguing to hear a bit more about why and what are the themes that are touched upon that are so significant to you.
Yeah. So actually, it was funny. Like. By chance, actually, I came across Audre Lorde because a friend put a book of her in my mailbox. So I was laying home and all of a sudden I hear this sound and I go to the door and I pick up this book, which is by Audre Lorde. And I think she knew that I needed this. And when I started reading it, I couldn't stop, because it was like kind of for the first time that I felt so well like articulated of all these experiences that I've like also felt, but also she talks a lot about anger and about emotion, but she's also a very like powerful like figure that really brought kind of, I don't know, she gave me the power to continue in a way and to like give words to the emotions that I couldn't yet deal with or like look at before. So that's also why for my first solo exhibition that was in the Fries Museum in 2020, I think, it was also named after her book, Your Silence Will Not Protect You. Yes. Yeah, for that exact same reason.
Yeah. I think there's something really interesting about the things that you've said around anger being a positive emotion, because society generally tends to see anger as something that in itself can lead to violence or as an uncontrollable emotion. But anger, in the way that you look at it, it can also act as a kind of release or as an expression of power or kind of holding something or letting go something. In a very strong way, rather than being a negative.
Yeah, totally, because I think anger is one of my favorite emotions out of everything, because anger is also this kind of source of power that we can achieve change and we can achieve many things, and also it's a release, and this release doesn't have to be aggressive. I think that a lot of times we for wrong reasons associate anger with aggression, which actually is not the same and doesn't need to be the same. And I think especially women get taught not to be angry. So there's also this like, I don't know, there's this frustration in a way in me. And I think actually most of the time when I look at sensitive issues or violence that I've had to experience in my life, that anger is a way in which I can deal with like letting it out. And I guess also that's why, for example, like I'm obsessive with making, but it's also for me a way to release all this emotion and energy that is stuck in my body and that needs to get out.
Yeah, and there's, you know, like everybody, you have like a primary role as an artist, and that anger can sometimes also be translated into the other aspects of your life in terms of the activist work that you do.
Yeah.
And I was really interested to hear more about those kinds of, without necessarily going into incredible detail about which ones or which campaigns, but why that is really important to you alongside your practice in which you already express it.
Yeah, so I think for me, as an activist, it's very important to do activist work, but also as an activist, you have the freedom to talk and to stand up for issues that maybe as a survivor, victim, or also artist, you don't. So sometimes when you can anonymize you and stand a bit more outside the situation, you can speak way louder and amplify voices that otherwise can't be that loud. And also I find it very important, like I realize also more and more my work is getting, like, of course has all these political messages also inside of them, but I find it very important to do my activist work outside of the especially white cube like kind of spaces, because I want it to be productive. I want to bring change with the things that I fight for, which at the moment, for example, is trying to help amplify voices for Palestina, but it also like often it's a lot of feminist work and a lot of work about care and around social safety, and also trying to achieve a more safer environment for our communities within the arts as well, and seeing how we can achieve that. Yeah.
And that tends to be done more in a kind of collective way, or with other groups of people, or is any of it as an individual?
No, actually it's all as a group. But often it's quite anonymous, so like we don't know who's behind it.
Right. It kind of leads in an interesting way to the way in which you depict what have been called aliens, but you often refer to as otherworldly forms.
Yeah.
So they're not necessarily, you're not necessarily focusing on the human in the work. And I wonder if there's a kind of relationship between that kind of decentering the idea of the human and then focusing on this other world, and that also dovetails with the role of the imagination, which I know is really important to you, and is also a space that you call activist. So there's this kind of, all of it is somehow interrelated.
Totally, because I think like I want to create kind of beings that are there, but that are not at all centralizing the human. Of course, it is in a relation to, and like we see characteristics that human have as well. But like these beings are also beings that I feel safe with, that I can cuddle with and put around me and feel hold. Whereas with an actual human, I don't think I would feel so comfortable doing that. But then also I think lately I've been thinking a lot about like this space of imagination that is kind of a universal space that everybody has and everyone can enter. And it's a space where there's no language barrier. So for me, it's a very beautiful and political space for opportunity, like, and also for generosity, because it's a space where you can be safe and you can also escape or like enter and feel at ease. And I think that's also why I work a lot with the imagination and with otherworldly beings, because for me it's also kind of world building in a place where I do feel this safety and where I can relax and like be cared for or nurture for. And
also when you have worked, not every time, but sometimes when you work with children, for example, and you know the times that you've worked with children who don't necessarily speak the same language, or they're in the process of learning Dutch. There is a space within art where they can actually find the means to communicate.
Totally, yes. So that's also the most like beautiful thing. So we've had these workshops where all these children were together that are at the same school, but like a lot of children are, for example, Duolingo or like speak multiple languages, and not always Dutch. Or but then when we make art, we all of a sudden all speak the same language. And all of a sudden you see this release also of emotion, of energy, and you can share a language together. And I think that's really something that is so important and beautiful. And I think that's also when we look at these works, everyone can read it, you know, and they will read something in it maybe which is like relevant for the one person and less for the others. But still it's all there,
There was a kind of interesting moment where we were talking about something completely different, but it does also kind of relate, which was our impression of the latest Venice Biennale that was curated by Cecilia Alemani, called The Milk of Dreams, and how we had both felt about that experience, and that for both of us, I think it was a really deep and meaningful experience.
Totally.
And partly it was because of certain artists who Cecilia Alemani had kind of brought to the fore and asked audiences to look again at with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And some of them were more historical or perhaps less well known. And I think they were, to some people, kind of revelation, or at least a kind of source of new interest. And there were one or two artists, I think, in that you were mentioning that were really important to you. And it seems like they also stray into that kind of really interesting depiction of not necessarily human or not necessarily alien forms. So you get these really interesting approaches to the figuration in their work. But also there's a kind of almost surreal quality to some of them. And it'd be really great to hear more about the ones that you loved.
So the one I really fell in love with was Overtouchy, and she was an amazing trans artist and made this crazy also kind of puppets and drawings and sculptural like beings that also felt really like otherworldly, and it touched me so much, and it also gave me this kind of feeling of like, okay, I'm not crazy, like with some, because sometimes I'm making stuff and I'm like, what is this? Like it appears and you make and make more, and at the moment I'm busy with making kind of this puppet theater, and there were some of these things that all of a sudden I felt like, you know what, it's fine to show this, like it's okay to, like it has a right to be shown too, or a right to exist, I don't know. And it was also the reason why in this show actually also, or it's part of the reason why in this show also a lot of these drawings that I have actually never had shown before are now part of the show, because I thought that they can be seen, but they feel very personal as well.
I mean, when in walking around the show earlier, that's what I found really interesting, because I was more familiar with this kind of body of work that I'd seen, but here you have these kind of egg-like forms with little figures inside, and the puppet theatre in particular I thought was really an incredible work, and it just gives indications perhaps of the things that you're beginning to explore more now that might be further developed.
Totally, because I can't wait that this puppet theater is coming back to me, because I actually really want to play with it. And also I was thinking of maybe making an animation with it, so it has kind of this start for maybe a new path within my work. And I thought it's nice also to show it, but the reason why I showed, for example, a few of them still in this egg shapes was because I felt like they just enter the world and all of a sudden everybody's looking at them, and sometimes it's nice to just feel a little bit safe in a cocon. So that's why the ones there are still like kind of in this eggshell, so that they have a little bit feeling of shelter, protection around them.
I don't know, since the room is so intimate and small, whether we could make it a larger conversation, because there's so much more that we could go into, but I wonder whether it would be nice to open it up a little and see if we have questions for Afra.
What's the thinking behind the crocs?
The crocs.
I actually have a love for Crocs. I love Crocs. Like, they're actually the best shoes ever developed because they're so practical. But also the original shoes were made of ceramics. But because the exhibition was so well received by all the children playing, it became a little bit dangerous to keep the ceramic shoes. So then we decided actually to have the Crocs instead of the ceramic shoes. But originally, and like in other exhibitions, I actually always show this work with ceramic shoes. But it's funny that you like pick it out as a
And there's also, if you look behind you on the wall there, the little green figures with the red shoes. There's also a relationship there and a significance perhaps that might be interesting to highlight.
So the red shoes of the green, like kind of they look like turtle figures, is like a red pump in you say
yes,
in the English,
yeah.
and I made them also in ceramics. And a lot of my characters get these red shoes because my characters don't have a gender, but I love that with the shoes because it's such a femme thing that I bring them some femme energy with them, which is still like, because all of them have it, and also a lot of times in these tapestry and in other tapestry you will see it, all of them have this like cute little shoes that then also you see again at the aliens. Yeah.
And then there's also this this interesting thing about where you might see something in passing, you know, where you see a musical instrument or a certain shape in a shop window, and that stays with you somehow and then becomes translated into a new work.
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the really interesting things about also this exhibition and the process towards that. You're bringing in all these different kind of visual influences.
Yeah, because I think also with this exhibition, because there were so many spaces, I thought it was also very nice to kind of experiment and like what you said also before, to bring in elements that maybe people haven't seen as part of my practice as much yet. And the funny thing is that actually only here there's kind of tapestry, but the rest of the rooms have all these other elements. Yeah.
So I don't know what exactly my question is, so I'm going to ramble for a bit until I get there. But I guess like what you were saying about stomach is kind of was quite interesting for me in terms of like how the stomach becomes a space where you intuitively feel and understand your kind of modus operandi and your reactions and your emotions. And I guess like, you know, in certain cultures, I'm Turkish for example, stomach plays a big role in terms of, you know, like defining a certain kind of like mood or era, and it's not something that just belongs to an individual but captures a certain kind of an essence of a moment that is felt and shared. So like stomach becomes, I mean, of course, for example, Liverpool Arena's last situation, 2 iterations ago, I was thinking stomach as a portal to kind of think about, you know, how to kind of like create a certain transition from inside to outside, I guess. And then your work is very much works with, like, I guess, like thinking about this inside being your inside, thinking about, I guess, you know, like your reactions, your emotions, how you perceive that kind of, you know, the situation at that moment, be it personal, be it sociological, and so on. So I guess, like, you know, when it comes to thinking about, what I was thinking about was also like the kind of the component, sound component in the exhibition, and how that kind of like adds this feeling, and also like the sound, which not only is something that we always experience regardless of our, you know, like personal conditions and so on. We always have these 2 beats going on, you know, with our brains and with our heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, like, in terms of how that sound kind of works for you within these rooms. I mean, I've only had the chance to visit the exhibition for 30 minutes, actually, very much in a rush, but I came across these 2 very effectful kind of, you know, compositions that you present the works with. So I kind of was curious, like, where that idea came from, and what was kind of, I guess, intention behind it, and so on.
So with the sound, what I find very beautiful with sound, because sometimes I get very overwhelmed, and sound can really relax me, but also it can fill up a whole space for me. So I was thinking about sounds that are like also kind of universal, we all know or relate to, that can be a backdrop, but are at the same time also kind of space filling, as if there is like a cloud in a room or something. So that's why I thought, like, with this room, because it's kind of like this cave feeling, and then when you are actually in this space, you already hear it. Like in the back, you hear somewhere this like weirdly rumbling sound, so it draws you as well. And I really like to play with sound as kind of a part of the element of the work that is almost also physical, like a physical experience, because it does take in space. And with the other sound work that is in the room with the kind of booby spider figure, it's dripping sound that you hear, and instantly you have this, because I think sound also has this kind of thing that when you would close your eyes and you would hear that sound, you would already maybe make a scenery up of how it would look like. so it looks, if I close my eyes, I think about a cave that is like slowly dripping. And I work together with one of my best friends and also a really amazing artist, Marnix van Uhm, that helped me design these sounds for these specific works. Yeah. Thank you.
And also there's like that deep red that you have in one of the rooms, and just the environment that you've created for the stomach. It kind of also feels that as an audience member you're going inside the space of a body. So it's a really interesting question to kind of tease out what those things are. And then under the thing that reminds me of light shade, but it's done in a different way. There are all these narratives which are very personal, completely fascinating, things that have happened in the past, things that might happen in the future, things that might be made in the future, which I thought was really interesting to see. Yeah,
it's very funny because there's a funny story in the lampshade, which was that I went on a date with a girl and we went to the sauna together, and I was already thinking, is this a date or not? But I thought it was a date, and then all of a sudden her friend also came, and then all of a sudden it seemed to me that it became quite romantic between them. So I'm sitting in the sauna thinking like, am I on a date or am I third wheeling my own date? And like I made a drawing of it in the lampshade, and then like we didn't date, and then we started dating actually. Now we are dating. But then yesterday I saw her because I had to give her the keys for my house that she has to open up for giving the banners for the protest for tomorrow. But then I accidentally said like, oh my God, there's a work of you in the show, because she asked me like, oh, can you give me a tour? And then I said, oh, and also you're in the exhibition text. So then we had a really big laugh about it, because she read the text and was like, oh my God, this is the most funny thing. Yeah. But it's really funny because the lampshade has also the puppet theater. It has a lot of like little stories and narratives in there that are dealing with my own personal life as well. And friends that are coming back. Yeah, so.
Yeah, it was brilliant to see.
Yeah.
Yes?
When you were talking about activism and like your kind of desire for these safer communities, I was thinking a lot about like the idea of like utopia. And I feel like I kind of read a lot of the brighter, like playful colours in your work as quite hopeful. And I was wondering if you ever kind of think about the idea of utopia, and if that ever like has an influence on any decisions you make in the work.
So I was thinking, like actually last week I was a lot busy with thinking about imagination, world building, and then like often this is said in the same sentence with, for example, sci-fi. But then I was thinking, no, I don't want it to be sci-fi. I don't want it to be utopic, because I want it to be actual there. And I think that's why I'm so interested more, instead of the utopia, more in the space of like, or in the space of the imagination, because in the space of the imagination we still have this hope, and there is actual change, like possibility for change in that space, more than the utopia maybe. But it is definitely true that I like to use bright colors. I don't know why, it's already like that for like since childhood, but I'm really drawn to it. And I think also maybe the bright colors make it accessible for you to lure you in a way, and then later you slow by slow see more of these critical messages within it. Yeah.
I had quite a visceral, like unnerving feeling whilst walking under the arms of the legs of the baby spider.
Oh yeah.
And I know you spoke about safety and feeling safe in the work, so I don't know if you could speak a little about that.
Yeah, so I think some of the some of the works also feel quite like intense. Actually, with the booby spider, it is kind of it's a semi-monster, but I didn't yet experience that one as not like, maybe you feel like it's quite intense because of the shapes, that it's like so amplified in a way, maybe such a multitude of things. But maybe I have less the feeling there with that, because I had it for a while laying in my living room and I was like laying and relaxing on it. But Yeah, I guess that with my work, I want to be able to maybe create a space where we can discuss these things like safety and all this. And like, I guess, especially for example, this work is good for it because you can sit on the floor, you can become kind of grounded, and it makes the resonation of the space also less harsh. But with the booby spider, it was more like kind of a weird envision, but I guess it's a bit like it walks like that. But I had just this dream. I woke up and I said to, I think I emailed Georgia, the curator of this exhibition, like, oh, I think I have to make a booby spider. And she was like, okay, go for it, yeah.
There's something interesting though about what you said about that experience, and when I first saw the images of it and then I saw it in person, I was kind of fascinated by the way in which you had the hands creeping around the doorway, or you were kind of brought or seduced or slightly scared, depending on your feelings about it, from one room to the other, where there's an abundance of arms, arms with no body in many cases. And it's an intriguing way to treat a space because they are discrete spaces, but you've also connected them through these limbs. And in the case of the booby spider, these really gangly limbs, and I completely love that work because I think it has such a presence. But it's kind of poised on the window sill, and one other hand is on the wall or the floor, and it's just really interesting how you use the space here.
Yeah, so we also spent quite some time. I think we spent more than 10 days or around 10 days also building up here, really looking at every space. But I also wanted to have kind of, how you have a narrative, or when you are reading a text, or like when you're listening to music, that there's a pause and then it continues again. That also when you enter this dark space of the light bulb, that there's already this sound like already attracting you to the next space. And then these hands that are kind of like welcoming you also to look already further, so that also a little bit this very, like, of course there's all these many smaller rooms, but I thought it's nice to break that down a bit by using this repetition of, for example, the red colors, but also this repetition of this bodily limbs, like you said, limbs,
Yes.
I'd like to ask, there's lots of stuff I'd like to ask, more than I've had time to ask you, but I'd really like to know about, I get the impression that if you were kind of washed up on a desert island, you'd be making something.
Yes, I love making. Yeah, totally.
And I just wanted to ask about, like, how do you always make, and, how do you kind of, do you find it relaxing, or is there a point where you're like, I need to just not make like today or like this week?
So it's quite funny because a lot of people tell me, Afra, you're working too hard and be careful. And it's true, I know I work too hard because it's also almost obsessive, but I need it because it makes me feel very calm, and it also makes me deal with, like, it's my way of maybe dealing in a way with my traumas and my experiences and releasing emotions that I need to let out. So for me, it's very important to make, but it's also funny because sometimes people are like, I don't understand, how did you make all of this in like this time frame? But I love also making, and I get so much joy from it. So for me, it's also really a pleasure to make, and it becomes quiet in my head, and I really enjoy it, yeah.
Because I know you travel with watercolours.
Yes,
so is that kind of your kind of anytime?
So the watercolors are a very good way in which I can always make in case I'm gone and I'm like, I need to do. Also, I realized that when I, for example, take a holiday, I still have the feeling I should do something. So either I bring a camera and I start filming, but the watercolors are a very nice way in which you have quite a small amount for in your luggage, but still can do a lot. Yeah, I always do something, like, actually I love it, yeah. I maybe, like, if I don't do something, then I guess then often I'm like really ill or something. Like, or, you know, like, I don't know, like if I really don't do something, then I'm really like knock out on the bed. Like, yeah.
I wanted to ask about your drawing watercolours, and about, do you make them like in a preparatory way, like quite often, and like the time works, or are they always like, I guess, sort of like final things? I'm kind of curious about whether all of these works were previously a watercolour.
So, oh no. I actually, well, the watercolors are like, they're sometimes sketches for just thoughts, more like they're more thoughts, so they just are fast. That's why also the watercolors that are on the papers there, you can see even the sun has like you can see that the paper isn't a good quality paper because the sun has bleached a part of it and it's actually a bit torn or something. So the watercolors are actually a very personal thing, like that also I've never shown before this exhibition. But for me, there are more like ideas or thoughts that I have that I quickly draw, and then it comes at it's a pile in my studio, and then sometimes I go through it, and then I find something, and I'm like, oh yeah, I had this idea. But then for this actual works, I often don't really draw them fully, like only when they're this size, because my studio is half of the size of this space. So this work doesn't really fit in it, then I have to go outside of my studio. We have a very big atrium where I can lay the fabric, and then I need to draw the outlines, and then I use it. But I wouldn't really with watercolors make a full thing, because then it feels a bit strange to then make it again. Yeah, I guess, yeah.
A question about like your approach to world building and like specifically like the javelins, like I imagine they were like a tool of the alien.
Oh yeah. So the javelins are very I really love the javelins actually. They are they're a symbol that also really come back a lot, but also they are kind of a metaphor for this feeling that it's on one hand, it's like actually it's a stick, it's to stir things up, but on the other hand, it's for me also a metaphor for like kind of this bag that we all carry with like this amount of javelins that we all have, that we can shoot and point and fire at something for good and to fight for, but also that it takes effort and energy to do so, and that's why the javelin is made of like ceramic, because it also breaks and it's also fragile. So you can't just shoot all your arrows at every single thing. Like you also have to realize that it takes energy from you, and you don't have an unlimited amount of this energy to achieve these things. So also for me, they are a bit of a thing to be like, to also make sure that you are aware of that too, But they could totally be also like tools for the aliens. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But it's maybe about strategically saving your energy for the things that in the end would matter most.
Yes.
In terms of throwing the heart-shaped javelin.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that strikes me is the approach to scale, because certain things are incredibly small, and then with the booby spider, for example, you chose to make it really large.
Yeah.
Is that something that kind of sense of scale comes intuitively to you when you emailed Georgia and said, I need to make a booby spider? Did you already know it was going to be that size, or does this come through a certain way of working or stages of thinking?
I don't know, somehow it becomes sometimes bigger and bigger, and I'm like, how is this happening? And then also with this booby spider, I had an idea, and I had no clue how to make it, because I'm quite clumsy, even though if you look at this you think, wow, but if you know me, you think, wow, you're so clumsy, how is this possible? But then also with, for example, when I'm sewing, it's like I'm not really precise. That's also why everything becomes a little bit slightly larger than like I'm thinking, because when it's too small, you have to be very precise actually. Yeah.
You know, I love the little threads that come out of many of your sculptural works, because it just completely shows that it is handmade.
Yes. Yeah, and I also love, like, for example, for me, craft is also something very important within my practice. And I love craft, and I think craft also gives me also this kind of peace of mind. Yeah.
What about the ceramics? What brought you into ceramics? Because there's quite a number of them in this exhibition.
Yeah, so ceramics, actually, I realized that with ceramics, I can just basically three-dimensionally draw what I think and quite easily build something. Whereas with wood, for example, you have to carve it and it's quite hard. But with ceramics from scratch, I can just build this figure and all of a sudden it's there. So for me, it's a really amazing way of instantly creating what I want to make. And also it's maybe one of the mediums I'm most familiar with, together with textile, that I've been doing for the past maybe 8 years or longer, 9. Yeah. Yeah, because I was curious about the way in which these ones are in this space, for example, and the glazing, and the approach to some of the other ones on the wall, or the more sculptural-looking piece next to the watercolors. They're all quite different. So this one, when I made this work, I'm not sure if there was even something on top, but I realized that these cones felt like any moment they will just lift up and like fly away. So I felt like it needed something to ground it. And that's why I used the terracotta clay, which is like this very earthy clay that just fires this beautiful reddish brownish color to again ground a bit the piece. And then with the work that is actually in that room, I made it accidentally with the wrong clay. So when I fired it, which looked almost the same, but it's a bit more yellowish tone, when I fired it, it came out of the oven and it had a bit more pale and a bit more yellowish. And I was like, this is not the clay that I need. But I felt it was also a shame to throw it away, because I think also with making ceramics comes kind of this responsibility. Like when you make ceramics, it stays forever, you know? It's not something that like is easily being recycled again. So I was like, you know what? I can actually do a lot of glaze tests on it. So like a lot of times my works also function both as works but also as glaze test or as test for other things. So I just tried to put all this like glazes on it, and I thought it looked really beautiful, but there and a nice reference to this space, but also different again. So I didn't want to show it in the same space. Yeah.
I guess I was quite curious about like the way you define these works for the purpose of like grounding the space. And I was like, often your work create these kind of like places where people can come together and sit down and exchange and create together, think together, whatever whatever the intention it might be. Like there's still this kind of like collectivity that you somehow create through your work. And these kind of ceramic works, for me, they feel like somehow these, you know, like vessels, homes, like metamorphosed bodies, and like some vessels that capture something else within, even though, I mean, the initial origin of the idea was coming from more practical space. I feel like, I mean, there's this kind of like sense of grounding that comes with the sense of footing, and that comes with the sense of belonging somewhere. So I was just kind of like curious to hear a bit more about, I guess, like, this concept of like sense of belonging that you create, these, you know, installations that you position within these kind of structures, such as like art institutions, spaces. So I was just curious to hear a bit more.
So, like, about the vessels, they are between, or like about these structures, they are, like you said, they are like between vessels and containers, as well as kind of looking like ruins. Like, they look like old buildings, but also they could hold something. And I think, for me, like, vessels are like also an element that comes back a lot in my work. And it's also, again, like what you also discussed before about this container that is this carrier of many things, or a vehicle for many things. And then, if I'm like not lost in my own thoughts now, I find it very important to create kind of space where there's dialogue and where people come together, and this is a clear kind of stage setting. Sometimes I do it by, for example, hosting, I don't know, experimental pizza nights or stuff like that. So there's different ways of trying to achieve that, but I find it very important that anyone feels like they can be welcome in this space. And that's why, maybe also why there's less human and more like imagination also in that. And also this like bright colors. I don't know if I answer.
No, you really did. I mean, I guess my question is like somehow a bigger question in terms of how you create a sense of belonging in these spaces where they're always in transient. I mean, I was talking to an artist friend of mine yesterday and how he was talking about his condition, that it feels like he's always on a train, like these institutional commissions that he receives. He's somehow like, when he's welcomed and invited, they end up being their family, like their closest ally, they're kind of like, collaborators and so on for that duration of time. But sometimes he said that, like once that project is over, it feels like the train like has left without him and he's left in this, waiting to find like, another train to get on board. So for me, it's just like, because of the kind of like structures that we're part of and how kind of short term they are, it's always these spaces that we create are sometimes stay temporal and quite ephemeral as well. So I mean, I think the generosity of giving that space is definitely valuable, but I think how do we, I guess, like create that sense of belonging quite prominently in these kind of vessels such as like so I guess it's a bigger question, but I think you answered my question.
No, it's totally, it's also very, I was also thinking about sometimes you have, when you build up a show and you've spent like weeks, months, days, like forever, and it's also this kind of like collective effort of the whole institution that helps you with arranging this and that. So everybody that has helped you achieving this, like making this together, it's like kind of a big network of a lot of people that like participate in like making this possible. And then it's so weird because after the opening, you drink, you get drunk, and then you leave, and then you go home, and then that's it, and you don't see the work anymore. And it's like sometimes also I was like, oh my God, it makes me also feel strange. Like it's
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. It was maybe an observation, having also, in a way it's where we began, but having seen the Dakar Art Summit, and one of the most amazing things about that summit is over 9 days, I can't remember the exact number, whether it's like 600 or 700,000 people go through that space, which is almost unheard of for a biennial of that kind of scale. And it says it's not a biennial, but it's similar to that kind of format in the sense of being temporal. And maybe what it comes down to is almost what I saw today when we were in earlier is, any institution is going to be able to offer this space for a specific time frame. And, there is this sadness when it gets taken away, and then therefore what is left. And probably it comes down to the individual impact or the group impact or encounter that somebody has had that they will then remember, that they will then feel, and it becomes something that is precious and meaningful, and it can't last forever, it can't be here forever, but somehow you've instilled something in somebody that has encountered the work, and maybe, I saw that in Dhaka, and I saw it, here today, maybe those are the things that are possible with something that's more temporal. I do think it's an interesting question, and it made me go back to this notion of alien and human, and how you see the future of humanity in a way by these kinds of projects. And it also relates back to your question of kind of long-term impact and how you view those relationships. But that would be a whole other whole other conversation. But yes.
Thank you. It's so nice to have you back in space.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, talking of temporal things, we've missed Afra. I'm
sure. I feel very much at home.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.